First, let me introduce to you the law firm of Bodman. Bodman is a Michigan-based firm with 5 offices and 140 attorneys spread out across the state. They are a business law firm, and they are the voice, if you will, behind SBAM's legal hotline. Today, we have 3 members of the Bodman team with us to help us go a little bit deeper into the legal and HR implications of things like the CARES Act, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, those are both federal laws, and the various state actions and executive orders that are out there. I think we're up to about 32 or 33 executive orders right now. It's a little hard to keep track of them. They come out in waves. First, we have with us Michael Melfi. Michael is a member of the Bodman Business Practice Group, Emerging Company, and Venture Capital Group, and the Intellectual Property Groups. Michael has his undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan and his law degree from Michigan State and an MBA from Wayne State. And Michael will be the MC as soon as I finish the introductions here. Second, we have Joseph Morrison. Joe is a member of the Bodman Business Practice and Intellectual Property Groups. He has his undergraduate degree from the University of Richmond and his law degree from the University of Michigan. And last but not least, we have Melissa Tetro. Her practice is concentrated on workplace law and HR issues. She is a graduate of Grand Valley and the University of Toledo Law School, where she graduated with magna cum laude. So with those introductions, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Melfi, and we're going to dive right in. Michael, go for it.
Thanks so much, Scott. And on behalf of myself and the whole team at Bodman, we just want to thank you for allowing us to have this opportunity. We know we're dealing with some uncertain times, and it's been interesting to say the least. And we hope that by the end, the outcome for this is to provide some baseline information, some fact level information about some of the legal implications of what we're dealing with here, not just through the CARES Act, but some of the other things we're seeing out there as it affects employment. What I want to do is just first point out, SBAM's been doing a great job. I know that some of the resources as the hotline partner, we have a COVID-19 response team that's been doing an amazing job putting out regular announcements. As you guys ask questions to SBAM, we will get you responses on fact-based questions as soon as we can. I will often reference things that are on our COVID page as a resource if we don't have them on the SBAM page. But we've been up there in all areas, not just the ones we're going to talk to you about here, but we've literally been fielding questions from anything from workplace employment law to franchise, even IP questions along the way, given some of the things that are happening with USPTO. But really, we're focused on staying on top of this fast-moving developments. As you said, there's a lot of propaganda out there and a lot of people just talking about it. We really enjoy our partnership with SBAM because we're able to be a trusted voice for the small business community of Michigan. So with that, I want to go ahead and dive in and share with you today. We're going to be talking about a few things, and all these topics do have legal implications, but of how you can be more resourceful, a little bit about culture, how you can manage your burn rate, and what to do be asking for help. Obviously, as we said, SBAM at sbamorg.org is the best place to get the questions if you can. And with that, we'll go ahead and dive right in. I think we chose the topic of being resourceful, and really what we mean by that is there's a lot of opportunities for funding out there in the form of grants, in the form of loans, and that's where we're going to start with. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my partner and colleague, Joseph Morrison.
Hey, how are you? So, and I think Michael touched on it, lots and lots of discussion about the different types of programs. And I think the keys are to focus on the SBA's guidance for the loans that are available. So people have talked about EIDLs or economic injury disaster loans. We're going to talk about those. We're also going to talk about Payroll Protection Act loans. And people have kind of lost the forest for the trees here. These are all SBA loans. So when somebody says you should obtain an SBA loan, the question should be which type of SBA loan. So we can dive in first to the Payroll Protection Program loans. on the next slide, Michael. And a payroll, or a paycheck protection program loan, a PPP or a 7A loan, is an SBA loan administered through a bank. So you should be in contact with your primary depository institution. And if you do not have your primary depository institution or do not have a relationship with them, or they are not an approved SBA lender, reach out to a bank that you have a strong relationship with. The demand for these 7A loans is incredibly high, and most banks are prioritizing their current client base. So if you have not reached out to your bank and said, I would like to evaluate applying for, or I am going to apply for a 7A loan, you should do that after this call. They are bank originated loans that are backed by SBA guarantees. These particular loans that are made available by the CARES Act are 100% government backed. Standard Section 7A loans are not 100% backed. And to the extent that you have previously applied for an SBA loan, you would notice that that is a material difference. Additional changes in the regular SBA 7A program are that you do not have to show the inability to obtain credit elsewhere to obtain a PPP loan. The loan amount for the CARES Act specific program is up to 2.5 months worth of your payroll costs, with that amount up to $10 million. So for most folks on this call, 2.5 months worth of your payroll costs are what the loan amount will be. It's a low interest rate program. There was guidance that was released Tuesday that showed that the interest rate on these loans would be 0.5%, and the loan term is 2 years. There is up to a 6-month payment deferral for amounts that may be remaining after loan forgiveness is taken into account. And there are a number of concerns, but to the extent that you have ownership of multiple businesses, you do need to classify those other businesses as affiliates. And we'll talk about that a bit on the next slide once we get through the eligibility criteria. And most people have had the question about, well, what is payroll costs, right? And as with most of this very fast moving program, the details are a little bit vague. The guidance that was just released this week is that payroll costs are wage, benefit costs, and other state and local taxes. So it is a very fully baked concept of what you pay to your employees. Payroll cost also includes what you pay to your individual independent contractors. So you have a sales rep, or you have a technical employee that may not be a W-2, but may instead receive a 1099. What you pay to them, subject to certain limits, can be included in payroll costs. What can you use the loan proceeds for? You can use loan proceeds for payroll, but then also certain types of qualifying rent payments, mortgage interest payments, and utilities. So the loan amount is 2.5 times your payroll, but the loan proceeds can be used for a broader set of purposes. Then the key, and what I think everybody's probably focused on with the PPP, which is very different from using from the EIDLs, is that aspects of this loan can be forgiven. This is not an absolute, it will be forgiven or it won't be forgiven. Forgiveness depends on how you use the money and how your employment base, which is the number of people that you retain and how much you pay them, changes between February 15th and June 30th of this year. Essentially, this SBA loan program is requiring businesses to keep as many people, as many employees as they can while they have this loan, and pay them as close to their pre-crisis wage as possible. And if you maintain your headcount and you do not cut wages, the amount that you spend in the 8 weeks before June 30th will be forgiven. So there are obviously a lot of details here, and I think there are two important points. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce released a very helpful primer on these PPP loans, and the Small Business Administration also released both the draft application and guidance for prospective borrowers, and we can provide those links to you. But those two resources are what we consider to be the best fact-based resources, not interpretations, but those are the current guidance from the administrator of these loans. So one important note, to reiterate this, a lot of people have come to us and said, I tried to get an SBA loan in the past, I couldn't. I know that I'm not eligible for it now. That is not the case. They have changed a number of the requirements to obtain a PPP loan. And one of them is that you do not have a need to show that you cannot get credit elsewhere. So that is a very, very important thing. If you have had a prior experience with an SBA Section 7A loan, do not use that as the guide for the terms or whether you could obtain this program's loan. And one flag that we had on the prior page, which was affiliation of related companies. To the extent that you're an entrepreneur that has multiple businesses, you do need to aggregate and list the businesses that you control on this loan application. So the term capital A affiliate in the SBA loan program means entities that are commonly controlled. So many of our clients and many entrepreneurs have multiple companies that they own. Those do need to be disclosed regardless of which company is applying for the loan. And I think, Michael, we can go on to the EIDLs. So the PPP is obviously the program right now that's front and center. The application's open tomorrow. The EIDL, which is the other type of SBA loan, is a program that was made available before the CARES Act and is still open. COVID-19 is an economic disaster that has triggered small businesses' ability to obtain an economic injury disaster loan. And we've included the loan application here. This is not a forgivable loan program. So very, very important to note, a lot of people have said, I've been told, I can get my EIDL forgiven, or I've been told that I can only get a Section 7A loan or an EIDL, or I've been told to get one before the other. First, they are very different programs. One has a forgiveness component. The EIDLs do not. But the EIDL is administered directly by the SBA, whereas the 7A loans, the PPPs, are administered through local banks. So you can go directly to the SBA's website to obtain and complete this loan application without the involvement of your bank or a middleman. And you can go to the next slide.
Real quick, before we bounce to the next slide, we've been getting a lot of questions and comments in the chat. If you could please make sure there's a Q&A tab, if you could plug all your questions in there. Our goal is to try to get to some of those questions during this session if we don't run out of time. Also, if sspam@sspam.org, we will literally be responding to all of those emails as you send them. These are really great questions that are coming in, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. We appreciate everyone's attendance and interest. I know there's a lot of questions out there. I'm going to let Joe keep going, and in the meantime, please shoot them over to the Q&A and also the sspam@sspam.org.
And so the EIDL criteria, the EIDL loans are much smaller, so it's up to $2 million, and you must show economic injury and need. So that is really, really important. The goal of the PPP is to get money out as fast as possible to keep people coming into work. The point of the EIDL is to provide a loan for those that have been injured by the crisis. So again, very different purposes. And we can go to the next slide. The criteria for obtaining an EIDL is slightly different than the PPP loan. The PPP loan's threshold is whether or not you have 500 employees. The EIDL criteria is dependent on what type of business you are. Are you a small business according to the NAICS code classification? And that is both an employee and an annual revenue calculation, and the eligibility link is within our slide deck so you can see this. So EIDL, you'll be able to see the application criteria through the SBA's application, but before you apply, if you are a sizable business and you think I may have more than 250 employees, you should check your NAICS code classification to make sure that you'll be eligible for an EIDL. Again, you may not be eligible if you have other available funds or do not have the demonstrated need for this type of loan. It is an injury-focused, need-based loan. You can go to the next slide. The requirements for an EIDL that are waived in the event that you tried to apply for an EIDL during a prior crisis, like the Great Recession or 9/11, when these programs were around in some prior form. There's no requirement that the business be unable to obtain credit elsewhere. There's no requirement that the owner or entrepreneur personally guarantee these loans. And there's no requirement that the entity has to have been in business for at least a year. So you do have to have some sort of acceptable credit history, but that is determined by the SBA on a case-by-case basis. And I think that's all. So I think we can run through, we have a couple more working capital loans, and just for reference, what the loans can be used for. Obviously, I think the baseline expectation with all of these loans made available, whether it's an EIDL or it's a PPP loan, you cannot take the funds in to fuel growth. That is the baseline spirit of the program. You can use this to pay payroll and fix debts and keep your business going as it is currently going, but you cannot use this to refinance your debt or pay out distributions to the owners. These are really intended for business use as currently conducted.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Joe. And I know those are very complicated. And again, just to kind of capture the EIDL, and and if there are additional questions, we'll be able to dive into those in more detail. We'll also share the resources when we follow up with the video, as well as the deck and as well as these documents. So we'll be working with SBAM to get you that. We did want to take a few minutes before we transition over to Melissa to talk more about the HR and the employment matters, is about managing your burn rate. And what we mean by that is that obviously in this time for small businesses, being able to protect their cash flow is an important part of that. And what we wanted to talk to was a little bit around the contracts and what happens with contracts and some of the contract concerns. Just as much as we've been getting employment questions and we've been getting questions about the CARES Act, we've been getting a lot of questions about how do I deal with contracts? How do I deal with my suppliers, my customers? What is this force majeure language that I never thought I would ever have to even know what it was or what it meant? Those are a lot of the questions we're seeing tackled. I'll touch on just a couple things and then I'll turn it over to Joe here. But basically the idea is we're recommending that all clients, after they get their house in order and deal with their employees, deal with these applications as a priority, the very next thing is to start looking through your contracts. What obligations do you have? What obligations can be negotiated? Who can you work with? One of the most common ones is talking to people about your rents or different bills that you have. Different suppliers, are they still expecting you to perform? Are you going to be able to delay the performance? Those are all things that we're saying, at least start looking at what your obligations are. What did these documents you signed and you agreed to spend money on or pay on or deliver on or perform on, what are your obligations under those, so we can start addressing that? We're obviously dealing in crisis times, very interesting to say the least, a lot of uncertainty. And what are we going to do? Because now are the times when we actually have to look at these documents that we signed. Joe, I know you have a couple things in particular you would like to point out on this one, but do you want to take over on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the keys here are managing your burn rate and contract concerns. There are two principal pockets. One is if you have someone who you owe money to, you should approach them and, outside of the specific language of the contract, ask if there's any room in the contract to potentially vary payment terms. Second is if you are owed money under a contract and somebody asks you, you should see what your obligations are, and before you take a hard line, make sure that there isn't room that they would have to wiggle out of the contract given this COVID-19 crisis. The force majeure clause is down here, and that's a term that you can largely Google it to understand the ins and outs and how some of those clauses read. But the gist is, as Michael was explaining, something beyond your reasonable control is often something that contracts will allow to vary the terms of what's written on the page or to let one person wiggle out.
And I have to always give my legal disclaimer that people chuckle at, but we're answering fact-based questions here and providing information and education. Please do not construe this as legal advice. If you have intimate or specific questions, that's where you would want to consult with a professional to talk through this. We're simply trying to give some high-level answers. We're not saying go out and breach all of your contracts. That's not what we said, but just we wanted to bring up that is something to look at. And with that, I think one of the things that a lot of people, I'm seeing a lot of questions come in about employment. What do I do with my employees? How do I deal with unemployment? How does this impact my team? With that, I want to turn it over to my partner, Melissa, who's going to really dive in and begin to talk to us about some of the things that have to do with culture and FFCRA mandates and other employment options. And with that, Melissa, if you want to take it away, looking forward to hearing what you have to share with the group.
Sure, happy to help. So good afternoon, everyone. I know that the FFCRA came out a couple of weeks ago, and we have all been diving into it since then, trying to figure out what does it mean? What does it mean for my business? So before I get into the provisions of that act, I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the general options that employers have with their workforce if either you're shut down via the executive order or you're just having cash flow issues or whatever the issue may be. So one thing that most employers, I don't want to say most, but a lot of employers are doing right now is putting their workforce or a portion of their workforce on a temporary leave. They don't have work for that employee right now, again, whether due to the executive order or for whatever reason. Put them on a temporary leave, can be an indefinite basis, and that way you don't have to continue to pay that employee and they can collect unemployment, which we'll get into in a little bit. The one thing you want to watch out for here is the WARN Act. So for employers who have more than 100 employees, if you are anticipating a leave or a layoff that lasts more than 6 months, you're going to have some additional obligations there. So if you think, hey, this is probably going to last 2 months, great, fine. Just mark that 6-month period, and if it comes down to it, make sure that you're reaching out to legal counsel for assistance there. You've also got termination options. You can terminate your employees just like any other time. If they're having performance issues, whatever it may be, there's no reason to treat the COVID-19 crisis any differently than any other time. If your employee is not performing, go ahead and terminate. And even people who are performing, right? This is a time where a lot of businesses need to conduct layoffs, and that's unfortunate, but perfectly appropriate in this situation. There's also the work share program, and this is something that a lot of employers are interested in. So this is through the unemployment agency, and it permits you to take units of employees and reduce their hours and their salary. So you can reduce their hours by between 15% up to 45%. And what that allows your employees to do is continue working, but collect unemployment to supplement their income. The problem with this is that it is administered by the employer. So you have to go into the unemployment agency website, create a plan for your employees and follow that plan. And you, rather than the employee, are responsible for tracking hours and reporting that to the agency. So it is a little bit of an administrative burden, but it's a great option for many employers. So obligations that we have now, pursuant to Governor Whitmer's executive order, if you have employees working right now, whether they're critical infrastructure employees or security, IT, people who are assisting with the basic minimum functions of the operation, you need to have designated that role in writing. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you do it as soon as possible. And we've also got paid leave obligations, which I'm going to get into on, I believe, the next slide. Okay, so the FFCRA, Families First Coronavirus Response Act. This is what we've all been dealing with for the past couple of weeks, and now it is finally effective as of yesterday. This includes the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. It includes Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act and tax benefits for employers who are providing either types of these leaves. The FFCRA includes a number of other provisions that aren't relevant to our conversation today. Next slide, Michael. All right, so we'll start with the Paid Sick Leave Act because this is the most expansive of the provisions here. The Paid Sick Leave Act provides up to 80 hours of paid sick leave. This is paid either at 100% of the employee's regular rate or 2/3 of their rate, depending on the reason for the leave. Again, this is only allowed for employees who are at work, you have work for them to do, and they aren't able to do it either on-site or remotely because of a qualifying reason. Either they're subject to a quarantine order, they're subject to a self-quarantine order by their doctor, they're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 and are seeking a diagnosis, they're caring for somebody else who may have COVID-19, they're caring for a son or daughter whose school or daycare is closed, which most schools and daycares are closed right now, or any other substantially similar condition. This last one is very vague and we have no guidance on it yet, so I would not rely on that 6th criteria to provide paid leave at this time. Remember, this is only up to 80 hours, so if your employee misses a week, you don't have to pay them 80 hours. You just pay them however many hours they typically would have worked that week, and they retain the remainder of it through the end of the year if they need to use it. All right, we've also got the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act. This only applies to individuals who need to take leave to care for a son or daughter whose school or daycare is closed. If the individual has the coronavirus and they have a diagnosis, they may be eligible for regular FMLA leave, but there's no paid emergency family and medical leave that they are eligible for unless they're taking care of a son or daughter whose school is closed. When they're taking this leave, the first 2 weeks can be unpaid. Remember that there is paid sick leave for the same reason. So my suggestion would be to pay the paid sick leave for the first 2 weeks, and then the remaining 10 weeks or up to 10 weeks can be paid at 2/3 of the employee's regular rate. This expanded reason for FMLA is available for your employees to take through the end of the year. And one thing I want to mention here is that this is just an addition to our Family and Medical Leave Act. It's not another 12 weeks that employees are now eligible for. So if you have employees who have exhausted their FMLA leave, they don't get to take this emergency expansion leave. Or if you have employees who have taken 8 weeks of FMLA leave, they only have 4 remaining for whatever reason. It's not an additional 12 weeks.
Melissa, hi, it's Scott. Would you
Yeah.
speak quickly to the companies that have not before now been subject to FMLA? A lot of our members have fewer than 50 employees. So how does this work with companies with fewer than 50?
Sure. So for people who have less than 50 employees, you are now subject to this one provision of the FMLA. You are not subject to any other provision of the FMLA. The only leave that you need to provide is, in addition to, PMLA, paid sick leave, whatever other laws that may be out there, is this emergency family and medical leave for people who need to take leave to take care of a son or daughter whose school or daycare is closed. That's it. There is an elective exemption if you have less than 50 employees, and we'll get into that in a little bit. All right, there are compensation caps. So for highly compensated employees, even if they get, their regular rate under paid sick leave, it's not uncapped. There is a maximum of $511 per day, or a total of $5,110 total over the entire paid sick leave period. People can't get more than that. For additional reasons under paid sick leave, this is taking care of others, essentially, the maximum is less. So they get a maximum of $200 a day or $2,000 over the entire period. For family and medical leave, this is paid, again, at 2/3 of the regular rate, but it's no more than $200 a day or $12,000 total. All right, and the great thing about the FFCRA is it permits employers to take a tax credit for these paid leaves. It's a dollar-for-dollar reimbursement from your payroll taxes. So how this works, if you're unfamiliar, is if you have payroll taxes in escrow, you can pay paid leave out of that chunk of money. If your payroll or your paid sick leave allotments exceed what you have in escrow, then you need to apply for an accelerated reimbursement from the IRS. And the IRS has continued to say over the past few weeks that they will be reimbursing these amounts within 2 weeks of receiving the application. I continue to doubt that timeline, but we'll all be optimistic and hope for reimbursement in 2 weeks. The IRS recently issued some guidance on what kind of documentation you need to retain in order to be eligible for these tax credits. It's actually a pretty limited documentation requirement. So first, you need to have some sort of documentation substantiating each employee's leave. So if they're taking leave to take care of a son or daughter whose school is closed, get some documentation substantiating that the school is actually closed, that the child is a minor who needs to be taken care of. Something like that, put it in their file, done. You also have some federal tax forms that you need to retain, and that's really it. So the documentation reasons for the tax credits are pretty limited. I would encourage you to have more substantial documentation requirements to substantiate your employee's actual need for leave before you provide it. But for the tax credits, there isn't much that's required. All right, and then CARES Act. The CARES Act has expanded unemployment, as many of you know. Under the federal pandemic unemployment compensation, employees are eligible to receive up to $600. I shouldn't say up to, it is a straight $600 reimbursement per week for 4 months. And that's on top of what they get through the state unemployment system. So if they're receiving the max unemployment through Michigan, they get a $600 reimbursement on top of that. They're receiving almost $1,000 a week in unemployment benefits, which is great for employees. They can receive additional assistance for unemployment, partial unemployment, inability to work, but it has to be caused by COVID-19. So if they're unemployed for whatever other reason, they're not necessarily eligible for this additional $600 benefit. There are consequences for the employees who misrepresent their need for the $600 benefit, and one of the big consequences is potential ineligibility for future unemployment benefits indefinitely. So especially for younger employees, there's really a disincentive for them to kind of game the system, because at any point in their future, they may need unemployment and not be able to receive it if they game the system now. All right, another great thing that the CARES Act does is it expands unemployment benefits beyond just employees. So independent contractors can now be eligible for unemployment. This is something I know a lot of companies were worried about when putting people on leave. They said, I have a lot of employees and I know that they're going to be taken care of through unemployment, but what do I do about my independent contractors? Well, now they are also eligible for unemployment, that $600 a week. Okay, Michigan, also one of the many executive orders that Governor Whitmer has issued over the past month or so, also expanded unemployment eligibility. So first of all, she put a temporary stop to the need to register in person, which was before the unemployment agency offices closed. So now you can't register in person even if you want to, but you don't need to. You also don't need to show that you're searching for other work, which is a normal requirement for unemployment benefits. And it allows employees to receive unemployment if they need to leave work involuntarily for medical reasons, if they have COVID-19 or they're at higher risk for COVID-19, or they need to take care of somebody else who has a confirmed diagnosis. The issue here is that, as many of you know, we have a lot of confirmed diagnoses, but we have a lot of people who think they may have been exposed, who may think they have COVID-19 and just can't get tested. If that employee takes an involuntary leave to take care of someone who thinks they have the virus but isn't diagnosed with it, then they aren't yet eligible for unemployment under this order. That may change in the future, but that's where it stands now.
If someone, Melissa and Scott, if someone essentially refused to come in because they're afraid, but but as you said, they don't have a confirmed case, or they can't document that somebody that they're close to has it, would that be essentially job abandonment?
It would be. That's a fabulous question, and something a lot of businesses are worried about. You know, they don't want to lose their workforce because people are scared to come in. What I recommend in that situation is, if someone's scared to come in because they're high risk or they have some sort of underlying medical condition, get a doctor's note and treat that differently. But if somebody just says, I don't want to be exposed, so I'm not coming into work, what I would do is I would put together a form that puts the employer in the best position possible to deny unemployment benefits. Say something like, I have work available for this employee, and this employee voluntarily is declining this work. Have the employee sign it, make the signature a condition of employment, and from there, if the unemployment agency reaches out to you, you have documentation there to hopefully have unemployment benefits denied for that employee. This incentivizes people to come to work.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. And you know, as we've been getting a lot of questions through the SBAM legal hotline. We thank you for using that up until this point. We happened to grab a few questions that we thought were relevant. We've gotten a few times. I know a few of these have appeared in the chat. So we're going to start by answering some of these, and then we'll move to some of your live questions. So Melissa, I'm just going to go ahead and read the question, and then we'll pass it along to you to answer. So the first one was, how does the FFCRA leave interact with unemployment?
All right. So it is unlikely, for reasons that I think we have another question that we'll answer, it is unlikely there is a situation where an employee is eligible for both FFCRA leave and unemployment. However, if the situation does come up, the employer has to pay FFCRA benefits. It's a legal obligation. The employee is then obligated to report that pay to the UIA, and it will just affect their unemployment benefits for that week.
Great. And then Melissa, what if I have an employee who already took 12 weeks of FMLA leave? Is he or she eligible for more FMLA under the expanded family and medical provisions of the FFRCA?
No, it's 12 weeks total. So for whatever reason, 12 weeks is all you get.
Great, thank you. And the next question we had was, isn't there a small business exemption to the FFCRA?
There is. So employers who have less than 50 employees can self-elect this exemption. Again, this is only for leave related to childcare. So any other leave related to a diagnosis or needing to care for someone in self-quarantine, you can't exempt yourself from those provisions. If you do move forward with the self-elected exemption, there's documentation that you need to retain, and that is included in the Department of Labor's guidelines.
Thank you. And since the FFCRA provides for paid sick leave, if employees are subject to a state quarantine or isolation order, does the governor's stay-at-home, stay-safe order qualify?
There is some ambiguity around this, but the answer is likely yes. The issue here is that the FFCRA isn't retroactive, so it went into effect yesterday. If employers were subject to the governor's stay-at-home order last week, which everyone was, and laid off employees then, those employees who are already laid off are not eligible for leave.
Great. And then what if my business is not covered by the FFCRA? Can I still provide paid sick leave?
Of course. And I know a lot of employers are choosing to do this. That's great. I applaud your generosity. Unfortunately, you just can't get the tax credit for any leave that you provide.
Thank you. And then the next question we have here is, I applied for a loan under the CARES Act. Does this affect my employee eligibility for FFCRA leave?
No, it doesn't. So there are two separate issues. Again, if your employee is eligible for FFCRA leave, it is a legal obligation for you to provide it. So you need to do that.
Great, thank you. And so the last thing I want to talk about before we turn over some of the questions we've been getting is that ask for help, whether it be your lawyer, your accountant, your banker, your insurance provider, or an advisor, or an amazing association like the Small Business Association of Michigan that you're part of. These resources are here for you. There's a lot of noise out there right now, and that's part of the reason why we wanted to do this, was to give you the detailed letter of what's going on out there so we can help you. I realize every situation's different, and so what I will say as we transition into some of these questions is that we're not going to get to every question, and I apologize. We're getting up there to somewhere close to about 60 or 70 questions, so thank you for all those questions. And with the remaining time, what I'm hoping to do is grab through a few of them, and either myself, Melissa, or Joe will answer them as we go through them. But basically what I would say is we are going to be following up, and we'll be working with SBAM to get responses to what we can. Some of the questions you're asking go beyond what we would consider fact-based questions. We still will respond back to you. However, just know we may need to discuss further engagement if we're going to dive down in some of the questions and the details you have. But for most of the questions out there, we're hoping that we can answer at the highest level. And so I know some attendees are not going to have a chance to get your question addressed in this webinar. Again, please submit it to sbam@sbam.org. The other thing that I would say is if you go to www.sbam.org/COVID-19, there's a slew of information there too as well. If you don't feel you've gotten enough, definitely make sure to hop on over to the legal hotline for those people who's applicable to, and reach out to us, and we'll continue to provide support and respond, at least via email, and if a phone is necessary, we'll follow up with that. One kind of some logistical questions we got is I joined the webinar late, I missed the information. No worries at all. What we're going to do is we're going to be recording this, and we'll be providing it to you. I'm not sure if it'll be via email or on the website, but this will be available to you so you can get it afterwards. I know as lawyers, we talk very fast sometimes and covered a lot. We will make the information we covered, especially the links and the documents referenced by Joe and myself, available to you as well. So those are all things. And Joe and Melissa, if you don't mind, I'd love to hop into some of the questions. Kind of going back to the beginning, Joe, one of the questions that came up is I'm a nonprofit. I'm a 501c3 or something like that. Does the PPP or does the EIDL apply to me, or is that something that I can look at getting from an organization?
Yeah, nonprofits can obtain EIDL and PPP relief through the SBA's programs.
Great.
And one quick point, obviously we're doing our best to answer the Q&A that's posted, and I've responded to a few folks by pointing them to the SBA's PPP program website. On Tuesday, they released 2 documents that answer many of the questions that are being posted. One is the draft application for the 7A or PPP loan, and a document called an information sheet for borrowers with guidance on how to calculate payroll costs, the forgivable portion of the loan, and some of the other nuances around how to apply, where to apply, and when to apply. So to the extent that we don't address your questions, please Google information sheet for borrower or PPP SBA information sheet, and we'll also circulate that after this presentation.
And those documents are up on the SBAM website as well, Joe. So the folks can go right there and get them as well.
Great.
Great. So the next one has to do, and Joe or Melissa, either one of you can grab this. This has been coming up as a number of actual employees of people or of full-time employees when it comes to looking at some of the measurements for the various stimulus packages.
So full-time equivalents, the SBA counts both temporary and part-time employees in the FTE bucket. So really what they're looking at is the number of heads that show up to work are employees, and that's what is important to them. It doesn't matter if somebody's working 20 hours or 60 hours a week. The number of people showing up is the number you need to be concerned with. And that is consistent with the spirit of the PPP, which is they want as many people showing up or continuing to work and being paid by businesses with forgivable loans as possible.
And I think before I hop on the next question, Joe, I think you bring up a good point. This was enacted as quick as possible to get some stimulus and relief going. Obviously, anytime you move through something so quick, there ends up being some gray areas. And some of the great questions we're getting are in those gray areas. And what we've been constantly saying is, look back to the intent or the spirit of why this was done. This was meant to get a stimulus injection of capital into small businesses so that they can begin paying their teams, their employees again, and get them back to work. And if you kind of read everything from that angle, I think it filters out a lot of the gray area that probably still exists that we're going to see happen in the future. Obviously very speculative, but there's people still lobbying and negotiating to see what's going to be there, what's going to change, or if there's going to be more stimulus coming behind this. But for now, that's really where we're at. Joe, one thing that is kind of to some people gray, and we've heard talks about different things, is this word payroll. When I hear payroll, I think of paying someone. Payroll means more than that. Do you mind just reiterating? We had a couple questions about what is included in the word payroll when you're looking at the PPP.
So, and this is another thing that's in the SBA's information sheet. It says what counts as payroll costs. The SBA has said payroll costs include salary, wages, commission, and tips, employee benefits, including costs for paid vacation or sick leave, allowance for separation or dismissal or severance, payments required for the provision of healthcare benefit plans, and payment of any retirement benefits. It also includes state and local taxes assessed on compensation, and there's also guidance specific to sole proprietors and independent contractors. So it is a very broad concept of what your workforce costs you. One other quick thread that I've noticed in the questions, as expected, multiple people own multiple businesses. Your application for a PPP loan is according to each business with its own unique social security number. If you own multiple businesses, you can apply for a PPP for one of your businesses and then an EIDL for the other of your businesses, because the businesses may have different needs. So they are separate businesses.
Joe, to be clear, I got a couple of questions. I can't apply for both an EIDL and a PPP loan for my same business.
So, and I answered that one in the Q&A, but if you apply for a PPP loan and you obtain a PPP loan, just realize that it will hamper your ability to apply for an EIDL, as it has at least partially addressed your economic injury and need. If you have applied for and obtained an EIDL, the SBA has said that there is the potential to roll an EIDL into the PPP. Just realize that the two loans cannot be used for the same purpose.
Great.
So quite a bit of wishy-washy guidance there, but one does not preclude you explicitly from the other, but realize obtaining one, the PPP, and then applying for the other may, in practical application, cause difficulty with that subsequent EIDL application.
Thank you. And Melissa, this one's for you. We've been getting some questions. Obviously, in Michigan, we're beautiful every season, being pure Michigan. The summers tend to be, for some people, they think a little better. And because of that, we have a lot of seasonal workers. What does this all mean for people who have seasonal workers that most likely only work either in the winter or in the summer based on the seasonality of their business?
So that implicates a couple different questions. First of all, the FFCRA only applies to employers with less than 500 employees. When you're looking at whether or not you meet that 500 employee threshold, you likely do count seasonal workers. The DOL has taken a pretty broad stance on this, basically said exclude independent contractors and everybody else counts. As far as whether or not these seasonal workers qualify for leave, it depends on whether they're scheduled to work right now. So if your seasonal workers are not employed right now, then there's nothing that you need to do. If they are working for you and they have a qualifying reason for leave, then they would be eligible.
Great. And you know, there's on some of the stuff we're reading, there's these caps around $100,000 for compensation per person. If someone makes $102,000, what does that mean, or what happens? How does that work with all of these stimulus packages? I don't know if Joe or Melissa, you'd rather answer that.
I'll let Joe handle this one.
And sorry, I was answering questions in the Q&A, so you're going to have to give it to me again. So
the cap of 100,000 when it comes to the stimulus package, and can we go over that 100,000, or should we get, what do we do? Is the person excluded, or what have you been seeing the recommendation be on that?
The SBA's guidance is that amounts over $100,000 that are paid to that person are excluded from the relevant calculations.
Okay, thank you. And then Joe and Melissa, I think, I don't know who's going to be able to answer this one. There's a lot of questions in the chat about independent contractors. Either of you have any comments as it relates to what you covered about independent contractors, as it relates to, say, or Melissa, as it relates to some of the employment stuff that you've seen come out?
Sure. So for me, for employment purposes, independent contractors aren't going to be eligible for any of the leaves under the FFCRA. They are excluded. What they are eligible for now under the CARES Act is unemployment. And this will be administered through the state of Michigan. I know the unemployment agency is diligently working on updating the website so that independent contractors can apply for unemployment. I'm not aware if the website is currently updated or if they're still working on it, but if you have independent contractors, I would encourage them to monitor that website.
And Joe, anything you would add about that right now?
I think it's really important to note that, notwithstanding the fact that employee is used, independent contractor payments are eligible for payroll cost to be included in the term payroll cost for determining loan amount.
Okay. So Scott, and I know we're coming up, I'm going to try to wrap up maybe one or two more questions. I want to give you some time to tie everything up. And then obviously we want to work to get the information over to everyone. You know, I think as we're looking at this, I'm still seeing a lot of questions kind of coming in that are more particular in nature and probably a little more than we can cover on this. And what I would suggest for that is definitely email, and we have the questions, but if it's a burning question, you need to answer to spam@spam.org. We will work to get responses back. We've tried to, like I said, I think we ended up with about 75 questions. Thank you so much for joining us and asking those questions. We answered as many as we can. If we didn't get to yours, it's not because it wasn't important. It was just simply a time thing and parameter. And what we'll do moving forward is get some more responses out. And so what I would say with that, on behalf of Bodman, Melissa, Joe, and myself, we want to thank you for allowing us to share this with you and to be able to be a resource for you in these uncertain times. Thank you very much, Scott and the SBAM family.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Joe and Melissa, for your time today. I'd like to remind everyone that we have been working very diligently to update the SBAM website, sbam.org. There is a lot of great information there, a lot of questions and answers, some guides, the sample application, the guidance from Treasury, on and on and on. So if you have questions, I would direct you to the website. Chances are pretty good that if there's an answer to your question, it'll be found on sbam.org. I'd also direct you to ask questions to sbam@sbam.org, and we'll answer them as quickly as possible. And last but not least, this webinar will be up on the website as soon as absolutely possible. It was recorded, so you'll be able to go back in and see the slides and listen to the comments as soon as we get that up on the website, which should be, I think, yet this afternoon. There's also a couple of other webinars that we've done this week, and we'll do some more. So we're not done. We're going to do this, I don't know about every day for a webinar, but close to it. And last but not least, remember that every day at 3 o'clock, we do a Facebook Live daily briefing with Brian Calley, our president, and Rob Fowler, our CEO. And there's an opportunity to get the absolute latest information every day at 3 o'clock. So remember to check it out at sbam.org and to check us out on Facebook Live at 3 o'clock. Once again, I'd like to thank Michael, Joe, and Melissa for their time and say good luck, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.